everybody? How's the sound quality in the back for you back row people? Okay. I don't think 1390 is working, so we may not be okay. So we're not on television today. You can do what you like. Okay. Well, I called this one Three Quirky Answers to Big Questions, mainly because it was too long to write out the title of three short stories, but also because I really do mean that in the sense that when you think of humans have been thinking about big questions for a long time, like as Douglas Adams says, life, the universe, and everything. The nature of humanity, the nature of God, the nature of life and death. Um, and religious doctrines and philosophical thought have come out with some fairly, you know, rigid doctrines about what they think these are, and these are the answers. But luckily, literature can play around a lot more with what if. So what we're going to look at today are three what ifs that answer sort of typical big questions. And the first one is a story that looks at the question of how has technology changed our idea of the nature of our relationship to religion and God? In the last, say, 50, 60 years, we've got AI, we've got computers, we've got fantastic medical inventions. How has that changed our sense of where we are in the universe? This is a story by Arthur Clarke from 1967, which is sort of the beginning of the technological age. If you don't know Arthur Clarke, he's one of the big three of modern science fiction, along with Isaac Asimov and Robert Heinlein. But even if you don't know that, you probably know that he's the author of the script for 2001: A Space Odyssey. So you can see the kind of mind that he's got. So this is a short story called The 9 Billion Names of God. This is a slightly unusual request, said Dr. Wagner, with what he hoped was commendable restraint. As far as I know, it's the first time anyone's been asked to supply a Tibetan monastery with an automated sequencing computer. I don't wish to be inquisitive, but I should hardly have thought that your establishment had such much use for such a machine. Could you just let me know what you intend to do with it? Gladly, replied the Lama, adjusting his silk robes and carefully putting away the slide rule he had been using for currency conversion. Your Mark V computer can carry out any routine mathematical operation involving up to 10 digits. However, for our work, we are interested in letters, not numbers. And as we wish you to modify the output circuits, the machine will be printing out columns of words, not figures. I still don't quite understand. This is a project on which we have been working for the last 3 centuries, since the lamasery was founded, in fact. It is somewhat alien to your way of thought, so I hope you will listen with an open mind while I explain it. Naturally. It's really quite simple. We have been compiling a list which shall contain all the possible names of God. I beg your pardon. We have reason to believe, continued the Lama imperturbably, that all such names can be written with not more than the 9 letters in an alphabet that we have devised. And you've been doing this for 3 centuries? Oh, yes, and we expected it would take us about 15,000 years to complete the task. Oh, said Dr. Wagner, looking a little dazed, now I see why you wanted to hire one of our machines. But exactly what is the purpose of this project? The Lama hesitated for a fraction of a second, and Wagner wondered if he had offended him. If so, there was no trace of annoyance in the reply. Call it ritual if you like, but it's a fundamental part of our belief. All the many names of the Supreme Being, God, Jehovah, Allah, and so on, they are only man-made labels. There is a philosophical problem of some difficulty here, which I do not propose to get into, but somewhere among all the possible combinations of letters that can occur are what one may call the real names of God. By systematic permutation, we have been trying to list them all. I see, you've been starting with A and working up to ZZZZZ. Exactly, though we use a special alphabet of our own. Modifying the electric typewriters to deal with this is, of course, trivial. A rather more interesting problem is that of devising suitable circuits to eliminate ridiculous combinations. For instance, no letter must occur more than 3 times in succession. 3? Surely you mean 2. Nope, 3 is correct. I'm afraid it would take too long to explain why, even if you understood our language. I'm sure it would, said Dr. Wagner hastily. Do go on. Luckily, it will be a simple matter to adapt your automated sequencing computer for this work, since once it has been programmed properly, it will permute each letter in turn and print out the result. What would have taken us 15,000 years, we'll be able to do in 100 days. Dr. Wagner was scarcely conscious of the faint sounds from the Manhattan streets far below. He felt he was in a different world, a world of natural, not man-made mountains. High up in their remote areas, these monks had been patiently at work, generation after generation, compiling their lists of meaningless words. Was there any limit to the follies of mankind? Still, he gave no hint to his inner thoughts. The customer was always right. There's no doubt, went on Wagner, that we can modify the Mark V to print lists of this nature. I'm much more worried about the problem of installation and maintenance. Getting out to Tibet, even in these days, is not going to be easy. We can arrange that. The components are small enough to travel by air. That is one reason we chose your machine. If you can get them to India, we will provide transport from there. And you want to hire 2 of our engineers. Yes, for the 3 months that the project should occupy. I've no doubt our personnel can manage that. Dr. Wagner scribbled a note on his desk pad. There are just 2 other points. Before he could finish the sentence, the Lama had produced a slip of paper. This is my certified credit balance at the Asiatic Bank. Thank you. It appears to be more than adequate. The second matter is so trivial that I hesitate to mention it, but it's surprising how often the obvious gets overlooked. What source of electrical energy have you? A diesel generator providing 50 kilowatts at 110 volts. It was installed about 5 years ago and is quite reliable. It's made life at the lamasery much more comfortable, but of course it was really installed to provide power for the motors driving the prayer wheels. Oh, of course, echoed Dr. Wagner. I should have thought of that. The view from the parapet was vertiginous, but in time one gets used to anything. And after 3 months, George Hanley was not impressed by the 2,000-foot swoop into the abyss or the remote checkerboard of fields in the valleys below. He was leaning against the wind-smoothed stones and staring morosely at the distant mountains whose names he had never bothered to discover. This, thought George, was the craziest thing that had ever happened to him. Project Shangri-La, some wit back at the labs had christened it. For weeks now, the Mark V had been churning out acres of sheets covered with gibberish. Patiently, inexorably, the computer had been rearranging the special letters in all their possible combinations, exhausting each class before going on to the next. As the sheets had emerged from the electromagnetic typewriters, the monks had carefully cut them up and pasted them into enormous books. In just another week, heaven be praised, they would have finished. Just what obscure calculations had convinced the monks that they didn't need to bother to go on to words of 10 or 20 or 100 letters, George didn't know. One of his recurring nightmares was that there would be some change of plan and that the High Lama, whom naturally they had christened Sam Jaffe, although he didn't look a bit like him, would suddenly announce that the project had been extended to approximately 2060. They were quite capable of it. George heard the heavy wooden door slam in the wind as Chuck came out onto the parapet beside him. As usual, Chuck was smoking one of the cigars that made him so popular with the monks, who, it seemed, were quite willing to embrace all the minor and most of the major pleasures of life. That was one thing in their favor. They might be crazy, but they weren't blue noses. Listen, George, said Chuck urgently. I've learned something that means trouble. What's wrong? Isn't the machine behaving? That was the worst contingency George could imagine. It might delay his return, and nothing could be more horrible. The way he felt now, even the sight of a TV commercial would seem like manna from heaven. At least it would be a link with home. No, it's nothing like that. Chuck settled himself on the parapet, which was unusual because normally he was scared of the drop. I've just found out what this is all about. What do you mean? I thought we knew. Sure, we know the monks. We know what the monks are trying to do, but we didn't know why. It's the craziest thing. Tell me something new, growled George. But the old Lama just came clean with me. You know the way he drops in every afternoon to watch the sheets roll out. Well, this time he seemed rather excited, or at least as near as he'll ever get to it. When I told him that we were on the last cycle, he asked me, in that accented English of his, if I'd ever wondered what they were trying to do. I said, sure, and he told me. Go on, I'll buy it. Well, they believe that when they have listed all his names, and they reckon that there are about 9 billion of them, then God's purpose will have been achieved. The human race will have finished what it was created to do, and there won't be any point in carrying on. Indeed, the very idea would be something like blasphemy. Then what do they expect us to do? All commit suicide? There's no need for that. When the list's completed, God steps in and simply winds things up. Bingo. Oh, I get it. When we finish our job, it will be the end of the world. Chuck gave a nervous laugh. That's just what I said to the llama. And you know what happened? He looked at me in a very queer way, like I'd been stupid in class, and said, "It's nothing as trivial as that." George thought this over for a moment. "Well, that's what I call taking the wide view," he said presently. "But what do you suppose we should do about it? I don't see that it makes the slightest difference to us. After all, we already knew they were crazy." "Yes, but don't you see what may happen? When the list's complete and the last trump doesn't blow, or whatever it is they expect, we may get the blame. It's our machine they've been using. I don't like this situation one little bit." "I see," said George slowly. "You've got a point there. But this sort of thing's happened before, you know. When I was a kid down in Louisiana, we had a crackpot preacher who once said the world was going to end next Sunday. Hundreds of people believed him, even sold their houses. Yet when nothing happened, they didn't turn nasty as you'd expect. They just decided he'd made a mistake in his calculations and went right on believing. I suspect some of them still do. Well, this isn't Louisiana, in case you haven't noticed. There are just two of us and hundreds of these monks. I like them, and I'll be sorry for them when this life work thing backfires on them. But all the same, I wish I was somewhere else." "I've been wishing that for weeks. But there's nothing we can do until the contract's finished and the transport arrives to fly us out." "Of course," said Chuck thoughtfully, "we could always try a bit of sabotage." "Like hell we could. That would make things worse." No, not the way I mean. Look at it like this. The machine will finish its run 4 days from now on the present 24 hours a day basis. The transport calls in a week. All we need to do is find something that needs replacing during one of the overhaul periods, something that will hold up the work just for a couple of days. We'll fix it, of course, but not too quickly. If we time matters just right, we can be down at the airfield when the last name pops out of the register. They won't be able to catch us then. "I don't like it," said George. "It would be the first time I ever deliberately messed up a job. Besides, it would make them suspicious. No, I'll sit tight and see what comes." "I still don't like it," he said 7 days later as the tough little mountain ponies carried them down the winding mountain road. "And don't you think I'm running away because I'm afraid. I'm just sorry for those poor old guys up there, and I don't want to be around when they find out what suckers they've been. Wonder how the llama will take it then." "It's funny," replied Chuck, "but when I said goodbye, I got the idea he knew we were walking out on him and that he didn't care because he knew the machine was running smoothly and that the job would soon be finished. After that, well, of course, for him there just isn't any after that." George turned in his saddle and stared back up the mountain road. This was the last place from which one could get a clear view of the lamasery. The squat angular buildings were silhouetted against the afterglow of the sunset. Here and there, lights gleamed like portholes in the side of an ocean liner. Electric lights, of course, sharing the same circuit as the Mark V. How much longer would they share it, wondered George? Would the monks smash up the computer in their rage and disappointment, or would they just sit down quietly and begin their calculations all over again? He knew exactly what was happening up on the mountain at this very moment. The High Lama and his assistants would be sitting in their silk robes, inspecting the sheets as the junior monks carried them away from the typewriters and pasted them into the great volumes. No one would be saying anything. The only sound would be the incessant patter, the never-ending rainstorm of the keys hitting the paper, for the Mark V itself was as utterly silent as it flashed through its thousands of calculations a second. 3 months of this, thought George, enough to start anyone climbing the wall. "There she is," called Chuck, pointing down into the valley. "Ain't she beautiful?" She certainly was, thought George. The battered old DC-3 lay at the end of the runway like a tiny silver cross. In 2 hours, she would be bearing them away to freedom and sanity. It was a thought worth savoring like a fine liqueur. George let it roll around in his mind as the pony trudged patiently down the slope. The swift night of the high Himalayas was now almost upon them. Fortunately, the road was good, as roads went in that region, and they were both carrying torches. There was not the slightest danger, only a certain discomfort from the bitter cold. The sky overhead was perfectly clear and ablaze with the familiar, friendly stars. At least there would be no risk, thought George, of the pilot being unable to take off because of weather. That had been his only remaining worry. He began to sing, but gave it up after a moment. This vast area of mountains, gleaming like whitely hooded ghosts on every side, did not encourage such ebullience. Presently, George glanced at his watch. Should be there in an hour, he called back over his shoulder to Chuck. Then he added in an afterthought, wonder if the computer's finished its run. It's due right about now. Chuck didn't reply, so George swung round in his saddle. He could just see Chuck's face, a white oval turned towards the sky. Look, whispered Chuck, and George lifted his eyes toward the heaven. There is always a last time for everything. Overhead, without any fuss, the stars were all going out. Okay. Another short story, sort of a reaction, I think, by an author to the fact that we live in an age of identity politics. This author is sort of speculating, what if we had never used our language from the beginning to make divisions between things, if we didn't have, Democrats and Republicans, or blacks and whites, or, male and female, or even human and animals? How would we think about things differently if we didn't use language to divide things? So this is a story from 1985 by Ursula Le Guin called She Unnames Them. Most of them accepted namelessness with the perfect indifference with which they had so long accepted and ignored their names. Whales and dolphins, seals and sea otters consented with particular alacrity, sliding into anonymity as into their element. A faction of yaks, however, protested. They said that yak sounded right, and that almost everyone who knew they existed called them that. Unlike the ubiquitous creatures such as rats and fleas who had been called by hundreds or thousands of different names since Babel, the yaks could truly say that they had a name. They discussed the matter all summer. The councils of elderly females finally agreed that though the name might be useful to others, it was so redundant from the yak point of view that they never spoke it themselves, and hence might as well dispense with it. After they presented the argument in this light to their bulls, a full consensus was delayed only by the onset of early winter blizzards. Soon after the beginnings of the thaw, their agreement was reached, and the designation yak was returned to the donor. Among the domestic animals, few horses had cared what anybody called them since the failure of Jonathan Swift's attempt to name them from their own vocabulary. Cattle, sheep, swine, asses, mules, goats, along with chickens, geese, and turkeys, all agreed enthusiastically to give their names back to the people to whom, as they put it, they belonged. A couple of problems did come up with pets. The cats, of course, steadfastly denied ever having had any name other than those self-given, unspoken, ineffably personal names, which, as the poet Eliot said, they spend long hours daily contemplating. None of the contemplator has ever admitted that what they contemplate is their names, and some onlookers have wondered if the object of that cat meditative gaze might not in fact be the perfect or platonic mouse. In any case, it is a moot point now. It was with the dogs, and with some parrots, lovebirds, ravens, and mynas, that the most trouble arose. These verbally talented individuals insisted that their names were important to them, and flatly refused to part with them. But as soon as they understood that the issue was precisely one of individual choice, and that anyone who wanted to be called Rover or Frou-Frou or Polly or even Birdie in the personal sense was perfectly free to do so, not one of them had the least objection to parting with the lowercase, or, as in regards to German creatures, uppercase, generic appellations of poodle, parrot, dog, and bird, and all the other Linnaean qualifiers that had trailed along behind them for hundreds of years like tin cans tied to a tail. The insects parted with their names in vast clouds and swarms of ephemeral syllables, buzzing and stinging and humming and flitting and crawling and tunneling away. As for the fish of the sea, their names dispersed from them in silence throughout the oceans like faint dark blurs of cuttlefish ink and drifted off on the currents without a trace. None were now left to unname, and yet how close I felt to them when I saw one of them swim or fly or trot or crawl across my way or over my skin or stalk me in the night or go along beside me for a while in the day. They seemed far closer than when their names had stood between myself and them like a clear barrier, so close that my fear of them and their fear of me became the same fear. And the attraction that many of us felt, the desire to feel or rub or caress one another's scales or skin or feathers or fur, or taste one another's blood or flesh, keep one another warm, that attraction was now all one with the fear, and the hunter could not be told from the hunted, nor the eater from the food. This was more or less the effect I had been after. It was somewhat more powerful than I had anticipated, but I could not now in all conscience make an exception for myself. I resolutely put anxiety away. I went to Adam and said, "You and your father lent me this, gave it to me actually. It's been really useful, but it doesn't exactly seem to fit very well anymore. But thanks very much. It's really been very useful." It's hard to give back a gift without sounding peevish or ungrateful, and I did not want to leave him with that impression of me. He was not paying much attention, as it happened, and said only, "Put it down over there, okay?" and went on with the tinkering he was doing. One of my reasons for doing what I did was that talk was getting us nowhere, but all the same, I felt a little let down. I had been prepared to defend my decision, and I thought that perhaps when he did notice, he might be upset and want to talk. I put some things away and fiddled around a little, but he continued to do what he was doing and to take no notice of anything I was doing. At last I said, "Well, goodbye, dear. I hope the garden key turns up." He was fitting parts together and said without looking away, "Okay, fine, dear. When's dinner?" "I'm not sure," I said. "I'm going now with the—" I hesitated and finally said, "with them, you know," and went on out. In fact, I had only just realized how hard it would be to have to explain myself. I could not chatter away as I used to do, taking it all for granted. My words now must be as slow, as new, as single, as tentative as the steps I took going down the path away from the house, between the dark branched tall dancers standing motionless against the winter shining. And then this one last very short one. This is a weird one, guys. Um, I don't know if you know Donald Bartholomew. He was a modern writer in the 70s, 80s. He's not a fantasy writer, but he pushes reality so hard the edges kind of split open. I mean, he's fascinating, but he's odd sometimes. But this is a story where he's trying to think about how do you, if you don't understand life and death yourself, which most humans do, how do you explain it to children when they try to ask you what death is about? And how do you try to tell them that life is going to be okay? So this is probably his most famous story if you don't know him at all. It's called The School, came out in 1976. Well, we had all these children out planting trees, see, because we figured that, well, that was part of their education to see how, root systems, and also the sense of responsibility, taking care of things, being individually responsible. You know what I mean. And the trees all died. They were orange trees. I don't know why they died, they just did. Something wrong with the soil, possibly, or maybe the stuff we got from the nursery wasn't the best. We complained about it. So we've got 30 kids there. Each kid had his or own little tree to plant, and now we've got these 30 dead trees. All these kids looking at these little brown sticks. It was very depressing. It wouldn't have been so bad except that just a couple of weeks before the thing with the trees, the snakes all died. But I think that the reason that the snakes kicked off was that, you remember the boiler was shut off for 4 days because of the strike, and that was explicable. It was something you could explain to the kids because of the strike. I mean, none of their parents would let them cross the picket line, and they knew there was a strike going on and what it meant. So when things got started up again and we found the snakes, they weren't too disturbed. With the herb gardens, it was probably a case of overwatering, and at least now they know not to overwater. Their children were very conscientious with the herb gardens, and some of them probably, slipped them a little extra water when we weren't looking. Or maybe, well, I don't like to think about sabotage, although it did occur to me. I mean, it was something that crossed our minds. We were thinking that way probably because before the gerbils had died, and the white mice had died, and the salamander, well, now they know not to carry them around in plastic bags. Of course, we expected the tropical fish to die. That was no surprise. Those numbers, you look at them crooked and they're belly up on the surface. But the lesson plan called for a tropical fish input at that point, so there was nothing we could do. It happens every year. You just have to hurry on past it. We weren't even supposed to have a puppy. We weren't supposed to have one at all. It was just a puppy the Murdoch girl found under a bakery truck one day, and she was afraid the truck would run over it and when the driver had finished making his delivery, so she stuck it in her knapsack and brought it to school with her. So we had this puppy, and as soon as I saw the puppy, I thought, oh Christ, I bet it will live for about 2 weeks, and then that's what it did. It wasn't supposed to be in the classroom at all. There's some kind of regulation about that, but you can't tell them they can't have a puppy when the puppy is already there right in front of them, running around on the floor, yap, yap, yapping. They named it Edgar. That is, they named it after me. They had a lot of fun running around after it, yelling, "Here, Edgar, nice Edgar." Then they'd laugh like hell. They enjoyed the ambiguity. I enjoyed it myself. I don't mind being kidded. They made a little house for it in the supply closet and all that. I don't know what it died of. Distemper, I guess. It probably hadn't had any shots. I got it out of there before the kids got to school. I checked the supply closet each morning routinely because I knew that was what was going to happen. I gave it to the custodian. And then there was this Korean orphan that the class adopted through the Help the Children program. All the kids brought in a quarter a month. That was the idea. It was an unfortunate thing. The kid's name was Kim, and maybe we adopted him too late or something. The cause of death was not stated in the letter we got. They suggested we adopt another child and sent us some interesting case histories, but we didn't have the heart. The class took it pretty hard. They began, I think nobody ever said anything to me directly, to feel that maybe there was something wrong with the school. But I don't think there was anything wrong with the school particularly. I've seen better, I've seen worse. It was just a run of bad luck. We had an extraordinary number of parents passing away, for instance. There were, I think, 2 heart attacks and 2 suicides, 1 drowning, and 4 killed in a car accident, 1 stroke. And we had the usual heavy mortality rate among the grandparents, or maybe it was heavier this year or just seemed so. And finally, the tragedy. The tragedy occurred when Matthew Wine and Tony Mavrogordo were playing over where they're excavating for the new office building. There were all these big wooden beams stacked, at the edge of the excavation. There's a court case coming out of that. The parents are claiming that the beams were poorly stacked. I don't know what's true and what's not, but it's been a strange year. Oh, I forgot to mention Billy Brandt's father, who was knifed fatally when he grappled with a masked intruder in his home. That one day we had a discussion in class. They asked me, where did they go? The trees, the salamander, the tropical fish, the puppy Edgar, the papas and the mamas, Matthew and Tony, where did they go? And I said, I don't know. I don't know. And they said, who does know? And I said, nobody knows. And they said, is death that which gives meaning to life? And I said, no, that life is that which gives meaning to life. Then they said, but isn't death, considered as a fundamental datum, the means by which the taken for granted mundanity of everyday life may be transcended in the direction of? I said, yes, maybe. They said, we don't like it. I said, that's sound. They said, it's a bloody shame. I said, it is. They said, will you now make love with Helen, our teaching assistant, so that we can see how it is done? We know that you like Helen. I do like Helen, but I said that I would not. We've heard so much about it, they said, but we've never seen it. I said I would be fired and that it was never or almost never done as a demonstration. Helen just looked out of the window. They said, please, please make love with Helen. We require an assertion of value. We are frightened. I said that they shouldn't be frightened, although I am often frightened. And I said there was value everywhere. Helen came and embraced me. I kissed her a few times on the brow. We held each other. The children were excited. Then there was a knock on the door. I opened the door, and the new gerbil walked in. The children cleared wildly. Well, there you go. So, answers for everything. Well, if you like Donald Bartham, there's a one story, the wonderful one where he's trying to name. He wants to figure out what nothing is, so he decides if he names everything that's not nothing, whatever is left will be nothing. But of course, if what's left, it's left, it's something, so it can't be nothing. So anyway, it's a wonderfully weird story.